argument that I think most people have heard in some form or another, but I think the way I present it, it might be a little bit easier to understand and maybe even prevent some possible rebuttals, and I'll also be going over those as well. So instead of listing the premises, I think it's maybe easier if I just show you the concept behind the whole argument, so you can get a picture of it and not have to think of it so abstractly. So imagine that you're walking somewhere and you come across a hole. The hole is not too big, but if you look into it, you can't see the bottom, and if you try and shine any light in it, you can't see the bottom. It's just darkness. So for some reason, you want to find out how deep it is. Easiest way that I can think of doing that, just on the fly if you don't have any gear, is if you happen to be near a stream, you could take a stick, and before you divert water to the hole that you're looking at, you could create a hole of the same diameter, just maybe 2 feet deep, and then you divert the water into that hole and time how long it takes to fill up. And then with that time, then you block it up and then put the water in the hole that you're trying to figure out how deep it is. And then you just time how long that takes. So you sit there, you have the water going into the hole, and you want to see how many times deeper it is than the hole that you made. But you sit there and it doesn't seem to be filling up, so you decide to go back home, and the next day you come back to the hole and it's not filled up. So what I'd like to do is to use this as an analogy for time in the universe. You can look at the opening of the hole, just the surface right there, as the present moment, what's happening right now. Now obviously that's now in the past, but just whatever time that is now, that's the present moment. And the water that's going into the hole, you could look at as the sum of all past events. You don't have to think of it as actually existing, but just all the events that happened, and it's filling up ever so slightly and closer to the opening. And then the bottom of the hole is the beginning of the universe. Now, you don't know that there is a bottom of the hole. You assume that there's one, but you don't know that there is a bottom of the hole with the same amount of certainty that you know that there's an opening to it. But you assume that it's there. But the only way of knowing for certain that it's there is for the water to reach the opening of the hole. So, let's continue the analogy. We all know that the current moment exists. Even solipsists admit it, and those are people who believe that only their minds exist. They can't prove that there's other minds out there. Only what they're experiencing exists. So even those people, they have to admit that they are experiencing something, so that that experience does exist, and that experience is inevitably always the present moment. So the question is, how did we get here? There's two ways to view time in general. There's different details that you have to sort out, but I would think that my analogy would be assuming a view of time that is, at least I think, demonstrable through experience. And this is the view that the past and the future don't exist, only the present moment. The present moment is only the way it is because of prior present moments building up to it. Therefore, it's legitimate to represent this view with water. The surface of the water is the present moment, but it rests upon all the water under it. The water, in turn, is enclosed by its container, which in the analogy is the hole. The surface of the water can't exist without all the other water holding it up, and the water as a whole can't exist without a limited container. Likewise, our present moment can't exist without prior present moments holding it up, so to speak, and a limited universe as its container. The other view is maybe slightly more difficult to grasp, but I can change the analogy slightly so that it maybe makes sense. So the other view is that all the other moments exist at once, as it were. In my analogy, the water in the hole would now be turned into a column of ice. And that is supposed to represent the possibility of every moment existing on its own without the rest of the moments. So think of it, you'd be able to cut a slice, in the column and hold that slice, and that would be one moment. In the water analogy, you can't do that. You have flowing water in a container, and that creates a surface of water. But with ice, you have the whole entire column existing already. There's no assumption that there's past or future moments to hold up the ice. You can hold the ice by itself without the column. But with the water, in order to account for the surface of it, it's necessary to posit something holding it up, water underneath it, therefore prior moments. So, if the watery view of time is right, we know that in order for the present moment to exist, there had to have been prior present moments that build up to this moment. Moreover, these prior present moments had to have been built up in a limited container. The universe therefore existed for a limited amount of time on this view. In the analogy, the hole can't be bottomless if we see the surface of the water at the opening of the hole, which is what we do see with the present moment. The present moment exists, it's there, and we have to deal with it. But time can't have been infinite in the past, because we would never arrive at the present moment. The hole would never be filled up if the hole were bottomless. You'd never see the surface of the water. But if the icy view of time is correct, with the big ice column, then it's not possible to assume that from the present moment, from the fact that we see it, that there are other present moments in the past or the future, or that there isn't an unlimited amount of them. But the problem with this view is something that I'll call demonstrable temporal becoming. So what that is, when you think of how you arrived at this present moment, you can recall definitive events in the past that led up to it. And if the icy view of time were true, you have to consider what sort of mechanism would assist in the transport of consciousness from one present moment located in one dimension, presumably, to another present moment located in another dimension. And furthermore, why would these moments be connected at all? Because they're in different dimensions. And even if they were connected somehow, because they probably would have to be, in order for becoming to be possible, that's just going through time, just transferring from one moment to the next. That's what is called temporal becoming. So if they were connected, there would still be the same problem present in the watery view, if you're considering an infinite series, and that is that prior present moments would have to exist and support the current present moment. It's just that in the watery view of time, you have the moments connecting themselves to the next moment. The connection is made, and then it's a moment beforehand is destroyed, and then you have the present moment. But in the icy view, the connection has to be some other substance, the connection between each dimension, each moment that's existing on its own. There wouldn't be able to be an infinite series of prior present moments, because then the connections between these moments would have to be infinite, because these connections have to be traversed if temporal becoming is to be explained at all. So, I'm going to go with the assumption, or maybe the demonstration, that the first view of time is correct. Only the present moment exists. This present moment is the way it is because of how prior present moments were. There is no future. in order to reach the future, and even speaking that way, reach it, there's nothing to be reached because it doesn't exist yet, but in order to reach it, more water has to be added, so to say. The current surface of the water is destroyed and replaced with a new one, as temporal becoming happens. And if this is the case, then we have to confront the bottom of the hole, the beginning of the universe. We can't look to various explanations that some people give for the beginning of the universe that are ad hoc and can't really be demonstrated as of yet. Some examples of these are the multiverse, quantum vacuum fluctuations, string theory, vibrations. All of these explanations merely add to the depth of the hole. And this is because these solutions just add more scenery out of which the universe arises. For this reason, I say they only dig the hole a little deeper. Yet we have the present moment before our eyes. The surface of the water is at the opening of the hole. If all natural explanations of the beginning of the universe require yet a deeper hole, then where are we to turn? Actually, to require naturalistic explanations of all nature is a contradiction, because you have to presuppose nature to explain nature. And then you have to explain that naturalistic presupposition naturalistically. Why do we have to hold to a contradiction? A naturalistic explanation of the beginning of the universe? We don't, and we can't ultimately. We can either say that naturalism is built upon a contradiction, or we can say, in order to explain the existence of our current present moment, that there is not a naturalistic explanation of the beginning of the universe, but that there is an explanation nonetheless. A non-naturalistic explanation could be also called a supernatural explanation, something above nature. The Latin super is above. We don't know the nature of supernature, the nature that's outside of nature, but it must not be made out of nature, and it can't undergo the processes which nature undergoes. If it did have mechanical processes like in nature, then that would only push back the explanation of the beginning of the universe, or the explanation of all nature, even further, because that would require more time in which these processes occur. So the only thing that may act outside of mechanical processes that we know of or can imagine may or may not be able to act outside of absolute determinism is a personal agent. So we can reasonably conclude that supernature must be a personal agent. And we have to conclude this, like I said, because if you don't, then positing a supernature that transpires naturalistically according to processes only just digs the hole deeper. It doesn't explain anything. A lot of other people, they might try and find an escape in quantum mechanics. They want to say that the universe is not deterministic ultimately on the subatomic level, whereas I think that everything is deterministic, that's outside of personal agents. All natural processes that aren't controlled by personal agents are ultimately deterministic. I don't see any other way that they can get going, they can be caused. So we find in quantum mechanics, it can only show us that when we want to measure or determine where subatomic particles are, that we can't do this with any certainty beforehand, before we measure them, because the particles exist as a wave function. They're not particles, they're waves. And quantum mechanics shows us that we can't measure where particles are, because you need particles in the measurement to interact with the particles you're trying to measure. So you change reality by measuring reality. But I don't think this justifies the thought that we should just abandon science and claim that subatomic particles in wave functions are outside of causation, that they're ultimately undetermined. I think that we can safely assume that these particles are in some way determined by other interactions in nature. So, the conclusion is, when anyone asks you for proof of God's existence, you should just say that the existence of the present moment proves God's existence.